Okay, well, Hank, thanks so much for joining me on the show. You and I have had this scheduled for a while, and I'm really looking forward to chatting. We'll get into your whole story, but first, I just wanted to say thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is quite interesting thing to do. So yeah, thanks for the invitation.
And we chatted a little bit just before we got on. You're in your attic in Holland right now. You renovated that when your kids left out of the house, and you use that as an office space during the pandemic. Looks like
I
a
did.
beautiful area to work. So that's very
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. So for your viewers, just in terms of geography, I'm 45 minutes southwest of Amsterdam, which most people know. I'm very close to the North Sea coast. And yes, this was my office with the many conversations that we had during the pandemic with customers, talking to them about their business and how we could support them. Did not travel for more than 2 years, I think. And then after leaving Prologis in mid 2022, yeah, this was indeed redecorated to become my office, my home office, for the company that I now run.
You've almost got the opposite situation going, where I've got a really dark background and you've got this very clean white background. We're polar opposites in our background right now, but it looks really good. So
Yeah.
thanks again for joining me on this. And I want to start by just getting your background, and later on, I would just want to hear what you're up to right now. But with your experience in Prologis, if you could just give me your background on what you did at Prologis, how long you were there, what you were involved in.
Yeah, yeah, great question. So my work life started in 1990. That's long before I joined Prologis, but I have always been interested in industry and logistics. So I started my working life in the airport authority company for Amsterdam Airport. So I was in charge of air freight marketing and later anything that had to do with the airport capacity planning, the strategy for developing the runways and all the rest. So that was the transportation infrastructure piece in my working life. I then moved to transport financing, infrastructure financing. So went to a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers and was in that corporate finance team. Was involved in project finance, privatizations, including airports and financing big airports infrastructure projects. Then moved to a logistics service provider, a Swiss company called Kuhn and Nagel. Worked for them in terms of anything that had to do with airports logistics, all components that you fly to an airport or ship to an airport for operations or construction. That's what my team did. And then in 2003, got a phone call from a gentleman in New York asking me whether I wanted to join Prologis. At the time, that was A&B Property, by the way. And my role there has always been client management. We called it global customer solutions. We called it customer-led solution with different names over time, but it was the account management role for all our multi-market repeat business customers for Europe. In the early days of joining Prologis, I was a jack of all trades because I was leasing space, I was doing operations, I was managing development leasing programs, I was in charge of marketing. But after the merger with Prologis in 2011, I really got back to the core function of running that customer relationship management team. And when I left, that team was 7 people, just in charge of all European occupiers, customers.
So I think a lot of people are familiar with Prologis, and they probably think mostly of as the U.S. as being the major market that they're in, but
Yeah,
Prologis has extended well beyond just the U.S. So when you were there, how big was that portfolio? And not exact numbers, but just broad
yeah, yeah,
terms, how big was their
yeah.
portfolio in Europe?
Good question, Chad. So for your viewers, the company that's now called Prologis is a merged business. It consists of Prologis, A&B Property, and various other companies that were acquired by either one of the two main companies that merged in 2011. So when I joined A&B Property in 2003 in September, I was the first hire in Europe. I always say jokingly, I was the test animal. I was put out there to set up the European business for A&B Property. Prologis had already entered Europe earlier than that. They went to Europe in 1997 and had built a pretty vast business already. When A&B started in 2003 and I joined, we literally had bought two buildings, two assets in Paris airport. We had one ground lease committed to develop space at the airport of Madrid, Barajas, through a tender process. And we had acquired land to do our first spec development in Amsterdam at the airport. So there were four projects, but that was all. We had no team, we had no relationships, meaningful relationships with local brokers, with customers, with development partners. So it was a very interesting period because I don't think I've learned as much in the later years than I've learned in the first years at A&B Property at that time, because you had to do all things. I had to lease space in Germany and Italy and Netherlands and UK and Spain before we had country teams. When we had country teams, that was done by, of course, the local team. But I was initially really responsible for that. So in terms of my learning curve, my learning experience, those years were quite special. Now A&B got to, I believe it was 60 million square feet for you in the US. Prologis was 3 times as big, so A&B was not big enough. Clearly, we had to grow, and we were told we had to grow. But then, of course, the merger came, and the two companies came together, and it was a merger of equals, as it was called. So literally, the two organizations were integrated. And I think we really had, skill sets on both sides that could complement one another, which oftentimes in mergers you don't have, and therefore they don't always succeed. But I think for your viewers, at the time when I joined, when the merger happened, I think at A&B, our Europe portfolio was 30% of the global business. Of course, the Prologis Europe business was much bigger. But the A&B piece for that portfolio that I know, it was 30%. These days at the merged company, it's less than that because obviously the company has grown in all markets, but certainly in the US through various larger acquisitions of portfolios of companies. Compared to the growth that we've seen in Asia and Europe, the proportion of the ratio for the US, the Americas is much bigger. It's probably now 70%, 65% US, or the Americas as we call it, and then the rest is Asia and Europe. Yeah.
So this a very sizable portfolio. I think
Yes.
the numbers right now, they're 1.2 billion square feet since
Correct.
buying Duke last year.
Yes.
So several hundred million square feet in Europe,
Yeah.
which is they must be big players in Europe. Is it a well-known brand in Europe now?
I think probably the most honest answer to that, Chad, is that the Europe market and probably not only Europe market, the industrial market is very fragmented. There are, Prologis certainly is the biggest player in terms of the portfolio, but there are many other competitors. Most of them are regional competitors, so companies that only compete with Prologis in Europe and not globally. But the likes of Goodman, the global players, obviously also have a presence in Europe. I think it's always a little fuzzy what the market share is, but it's certainly true that Prologis is, in terms of portfolio, the largest and is considered to be the leading player in terms of its strategy, its innovation, and all the rest. But there is a whole world out there of competitors. Again, some are regional, national, some are global. And it differs market by market, by the way. In some markets, Prologis is absolutely the biggest. And in some we're one of probably 20, 30 larger players. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that because I found that even in the US, so Prologis' entire portfolio called 1.2 billion, that's that's global too. That's not even just the US, but in
Yeah,
the US, there's about 22 billion square feet worth of
right.
inventory. So even if you just took their entire portfolio, the biggest property owner only owns less than
Yeah,
5% of the
yeah,
entire market. So it
exactly.
really is a fragmented market on that.
It is, it is. And
In
the only
Europe,
other maybe interesting difference, if you look at Europe versus the global Prologis business, again, I'm no longer with Prologis, but I can speak about it. If you look at the concentration of, let's say, the top 25 occupiers in the list of customers, the Europe percentage is much, much higher. There's a much bigger concentration of that top 25 as a proportion of the total portfolio in Europe than it is globally. Now, number-wise, that's logical, but it is certainly true that a lot of certainly the logistics service provider customers have European roots, have at some point, started their life in Europe. So they're very powerful, very big. And Prologis has, gained its fair share of that. So I think at the top of my head is, I think the top 25 was like 35% of our business, which is a lot.
oh well.
That includes the logistics service providers, it includes the large automotive companies, the e-com players, all of that. So you have a smaller number of very, very big, very powerful companies to deal with, whose buying power is incredible.
What have you it really is.
Yeah.
What have you noticed, and even from earlier in your career, Prologis, where you would be
Yeah.
working in Italy or you'd be working in Spain or all over Europe, what have you
Yeah.
noticed as similarities and differences between the different countries there, or and not necessarily in a societal or other context, but really just in like the real estate context on how companies view industrial real estate? Is there a lot of similarities or are there a lot of differences between a company that's leasing industrial space in Italy or a company that's leasing industrial space in France?
Yeah. I think the importance of industrial real estate for those customers is probably alike. They all want to be, in the most important logistic location or hotspots, corridors, whatever you want to name it. So the interest in industrial doesn't differ country by country. What makes it very hard for customers, but equally, I think, for brokers and for developers, is that Europe is a subset of, depending on how you look at it, 20 plus countries, with each one of them having their own legal systems, their own fiscal systems. Contracts are different. Some look at gross space, some look at net space, all those different things. In some places, customers responsible for maintenance of this, and sometimes it's triple net. It is a myriad of differences, which makes it quite hard for multi-markets, so the larger global or even pan-Europe customers have to do business differently country by country. Not even because of culture or language, but the way business is done is different in every country. Even within a country, look at Germany. If you go to a broker in Germany, a larger broker firm, they will probably say to you, well, we've got this gentleman in the north of Germany. We're very good at that, but actually in central Germany, we're not that well positioned. And in southern Germany, it's not one country. Even there, it is a very regional, maybe even local country. So it's been, now that's hard on the one hand. It makes life, from my opinion, very interesting because it's not easy. If you want to be a big player in that market and manage all those differences, and yet become, the leading player, that's not an easy job. That's not just a matter of having scale and having financing and all the right tools behind you. It is, door-to-door combat almost. It makes life, I think, I find it fascinating. But some will be a bit disappointed or surprised at how different Europe is. And one clear example that I've seen from the very start is the Netherlands, where I live, and the northern part of Belgium, the neighboring country, speak the same language. We can understand each other. There could not be two countries that are more different than those two. So people that think, well, we've got this Dutch gentleman and we'll let him do business in Belgium, he's going to have a hard time. So ultimately, what I think Prologis did and others did is you have to have local people, local relationships, see where you can have the benefit of scale. But the reality is, it's a fragmented, very diverse marketplace.
Yeah, and the language barrier, as you alluded to, is has got to be a large challenge as you're
Yeah,
going, perhaps having one conversation in the morning with somebody in France, in the afternoon you're having a conversation with someone in German,
yeah,
and then in the evening you're having a conversation with someone in Italy.
yeah.
That's a lot that you've got to juggle
It is.
at
It
any
is.
given day. So
And it's little
yeah.
things, Chad. It's how you get dressed to a meeting. In some places, you've got to be dressed up with a
Mm.
suit and a tie. In other places, you're not supposed to do that. If I would have a light blue shirt in the UK, they don't like that. They want to see a white shirt. So it's very tough. In some places, in a meeting, senior and junior, they're all mixing up and speaking to one another. In others, you're not supposed to speak up if you're junior. So you have to be really well prepared to navigate that space. But I think, yeah, again, we've done a good job, in my opinion, doing that. But yeah, sometimes it's a struggle, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's what makes life interesting, is having new
It
challenges
is.
to go after. I want
Yeah.
to go back to the part about what companies look for that you've dealt with in Europe. And you mentioned they all want to be in large logistic hubs. They want to be strategically located. When you were dealing with these companies, what did they typically look for in the building itself? Were there standards across different countries in Europe on ceiling heights or loading doors, or how the building was configured, or were there differences in that as well?
Yes, there are very big differences. So when I go back to 2003, when I joined A&B and we did our first developments in the Netherlands, the Dutch standard is you have one dock door for every 10,000 square feet. That's the ratio. My American colleagues said that's all rubbish. We need to have double that. So let's have two doors. Let's have as many doors as we can because that's what we're doing, and that's so we have changed the standard a little bit as we went along, I would say. I would, when it comes to clear heights, or to truck court depth, that's probably bit the same everywhere. Where it becomes different again is fire regulations. So
Mm.
in Germany, if you want to go 34-foot high, the regulations are different from that same building that you would build across the border in, Austria or Switzerland. Um, so there are definitely local changes or differences. But I would say an established, experienced occupier who knows his staff will demand the same things across Europe. And I think the bigger occupiers definitely have influence, and they should, over what they're procuring, what they're buying. So I think over time we've seen certainly a flight to quality with the likes of Prologis entering the market and other larger international developers. Certainly standards have changed. Um, but in some markets you have a metal structure, and in some cases you have a concrete structure. Truck courts are differently paved across Europe. Some are concrete, some are asphalt, some are stones that can have grass grow, in it, like in Germany. It's not the same spec across Europe. I know Prologis, when I was there, we certainly developed what you could qualify as a European spec. But then there are all these translations that you need to do to get it basically approved by the authorities for your building permit, country by country, and even sometimes within a country it can be different. When for example, the
Mm.
the Düsseldorf airport, this is a long time ago, had a big fire so the passenger terminal was on fire. That led to a whole change of fire regulations in that Orion Ruhr area, where previously a certain height was acceptable, and then all of a sudden that changed. So it's the same as what I just said. It's very different country by country, or even within countries. But occupiers certainly go for, of course, the best they can get, and I believe that we were definitely providing that. But yeah, it's moving the standard every time to a higher level. By the time that you believe you've just done the best there is, someone else will copy it, which is sort of what I've noticed with Prologis, all day long. We were definitely out there, certainly pushing the limit and getting better specs. But then the reality is that once you do that, you give that away to a contractor. It's no longer your own domain. Someone else will probably do the same. So that's the reality of being a market leader. It's not a bad thing. It's not state secret that happens. Yeah.
I guess it's better to be chased than to be the one doing the
Yes.
chasing.
Oh yeah.
But
Oh,
it's interesting how like
yeah.
you still need innovation, even just building boxes, which that
Yeah.
simplifies what an industrial building is. But it's essentially
Exactly.
a box where people are bringing
Yeah.
things in. The average person, the layman, wouldn't think that you have to be innovating in the industrial space. But
Right.
as you alluded
Yeah, you
to,
do.
if people are catching up to you, you need to stay ahead.
They are. And I'll give you, maybe for your viewers, one very concrete innovation that I saw, which we did about 5 years ago. Normally, when you have your dock doors and you have your sort of trafficking, maneuvering area, there are columns there, right? There's a mezzanine maybe that is supported by columns. And then, of course, you have your aisles and you have your normal column grid. What Prologis decided to do at some point, and I think this was very smart, is to not have columns at the end of that mezzanine level. How was that done? That mezzanine was not supported by columns on the warehouse floor. It was with a metal structure attached to the roof, beams. So it was literally hanging there, giving incredible freedom of space to users, right? There's no longer that column in your way between the dock door and your aisles. It's, free space. That's something that I think makes a ton of sense for users. It's something that I've seen being developed, in fact, in the Netherlands, and is now being rolled out to other countries. But that happens in an industrial building, and it sounds trivial, but those things are really meaningful and valuable to users. And that feedback was definitely given when I was there.
Let's transition to the user side, because you played a big role in interfacing with the tenants, the customer essentially for Prologis. When you're dealing with these large companies, what was the process like in terms of who you'd be dealing with? And I guess a two-part question. So maybe we can get to the first one, just of like what the process was like. But I'd also like to see what some of the common or large problems that came up from these groups and how you dealt with them. But first, what was the process? Like, who would you deal with if you're dealing with a large international 3PL or logistics company? Who would you be dealing with in that case?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chad, because I think it gets us to another difference between Europe and the Americas, or North America. You would normally deal with a requirement starts through a national team. So it'd be a head of real estate for Germany who goes out to the market, for a solution. And so you'd be dealing with that national player who writes the tender process, the RFQ, whatever it may be, is the person that you would deal with. Obviously, in terms of approvals, it would go to a regional level, and it would probably go to a global level. But you're still dealing with the company that's going to lease your space. Now you're going to say, where's the broker, right? Don't you deal with a broker? The broker definitely is there. And there are companies that will say, here's my broker. He's the person who's going to represent me. You speak to him or her. But in a lot of cases, the occupier, the corporate real estate team of that customer is very, very much involved. And so having the good connections to all those levels is critical. I'll give you, and I think I can probably mention that name since it's no secret. If you pick a German company like DB Schenker that we all know, when you have a requirement from them, it first gets approved by the national organization. It then goes to the Schenker AG, their sort of global company based in Essen, Germany. And if it goes over a certain threshold of investment, it goes to the mother company, German Rail, Deutsche Bahn in Berlin. So, and that process can be quite long. It can be typically 3-4 months if you're lucky. Then there's obviously lawyers and there's all sorts of other people involved. The brokers, when I joined, there definitely were brokers active and they were representing customers as well. But the strength of the broker, the tenant rep business in Europe, still today, I think is, with the exception of a few very qualified, good individuals, but is nothing compared to what you see in the US. Brokers are very good at, leasing space as what they call agency work. They're good at bringing investments. Their capital markets teams are often very, very good. But there are only a few that I think have true mandates to represent customers. Because all of them, many will say, I'm representing this customer, but then you have to really dig into, well, is that really true? Does that person indeed represent this customer, or is he an advisor? Is he like a second opinion person? Does he do other work for that customer, or does he represent them in France but not elsewhere? It's a market. It's a phenomenon that I think is changing. The broker business is becoming more professional and is growing, but nothing, I think, compared. And that's not a negative to Europe, but just an observation from what I know from US brokers, because I've been part of SIOR as well. Very, very different. So you deal with, back to your question, you deal with the company's real estate team who normally oversee multiple markets.
And what were some of the issues? Because if I'm guessing to some extent your role would have been like the equivalent of a property manager, where people never call to tell you that you're doing a great job. They always call with an issue. There's always something going on. Yeah. So when you get a call, they're not saying, Hank, we just wanted to thank you for doing such a great job. Love everything we're doing. That's all we had to call for. They're probably calling with some kind of issue. Was there any common issue that came up, or was it always just having to deal with individual things as they came up?
Yeah, in the work that I did, and again, when I left, and it's the name we still use, it's called Customer-Led Solutions, CLS, that's the name of the team. I think it's fair to say that the customers that I was representing personally, that I was responsible for, that included Kuehne+Nagel, DHL, but also BMW and some larger other industrial players. I really think that we had trust relationships. So the global head of real estate that I would deal with, not just for Europe, by the way, but for other requirements across the world, for which he would call me, I think there was a situation of mutual respect. He would not blame me for a leaking roof somewhere. But I have definitely been many, many times involved in situations where a situation got out of hand with a customer somewhere. That could have been a property issue, like a leaking roof. It's happened a few times. And that's normal, right? That's the way business is done. That just happens. But also payment issues, or you're doing tenant improvement work and specs aren't met, then that would definitely bubble up to me and my team. And some customers, therefore, can be very powerful and can be quite strong and maybe even abrasive, getting their stuff organized. The other side of the coin is, what if success happens? What if something really good occurs? And that's normally when you land a really big, wonderful, juicy build-to-suit and everybody is happy. Now, does the relationship manager who's been instrumental in that, i.e. me or someone in my team, get recognized for that, get rewarded for that? Probably not. It's like being, the manager behind the sportsman, and in the picture you see him sort of, you see the part of his head behind the sportsman, but you're not truly in the front there. You're not putting points on the board. And I've always decided to deliberately be in that sort of background position because it needs to be the win by the local team. The fact that I've helped manage that relationship and certainly contribute to that win, but we always call it winning outcomes. And we were rewarded for that. We were taken good care of when we did that. But it's ultimately the local team that does that deal, negotiates it. And sometimes I'm part of it and sometimes I'm not. And some customers see that. Well, they'll come to you at the groundbreaking and say, thank you. We thank you for this. And that's nice. Everybody needs, I guess, a bit of recognition at some point. But the trick is, I think, in the role that I was in, which was functional, is to not step over the line and claim victory as your victory. But say, I was part of this, but it's your deal, John, Jack, or Jill. This is what you did, and I'll happily do it again. I'll get my recognition when I take this thing to investment committee, and people will, understand what my role has been. But it's a fragile, it's a fine line that you have to be aware of, because if you're stepping over that line, local teams won't come to you because they're like, well, this ego is a bit too big. Let's not go there. And it's worked well both ways. But yeah, it's been an interesting job dealing with the good and the bad, with up cycles and down cycles as well. Because dealing with a customer in a good market is very different from dealing with a customer when things go sideways, which obviously in my time there has also happened in the financial crisis and so on. So I've seen everything.
So you were just about 20 years at Prologis then?
I was close to
Well,
19
A&D.
years
Yep.
in Prologis, yeah. Which I think probably is not unique. There's multiple people that will have gone over the sort of 15-year or even 20-year mark. But the organization is definitely I say that, getting more younger people into the organization. And it's a good thing for people like myself to at some point then, make room for the next generation. And that's what I've deliberately done last year, about a year ago, just to say, made my run, done what I wanted to do, and let's now make sure other people come in. And I've spent, well, maybe 2 years before I left, training those people up and getting them in place before I could say I'm off.
When you reflect back on a 19-year career directly in the industrial real estate space, any highlights, anything that really stands out for you as a theme, or something that you just really liked or perhaps didn't like about the industry?
I think we're all a bit, I think, deal oriented, deal junkies in whatever place we are. I think the best experience, the best year, if I remember, was 2015, when through, again, relationships that I had in Europe with a company that at the time was called Menlo Logistics. It was acquired by GXO, XPO, later GXO. We had very good relationships with their US board, and our chairman was well connected to the chairman of the mother company, Conway. So we had relationships at all three levels. And we were able in 1 year to do, in fact, well, it was, technically speaking, two build-to-suits. One in Amsterdam at the airports for Google. So data center equipment and spare parts. Big one with the most expensive land in our portfolio we could monetize doing that deal. So that was a big win. And then that same company acquired or procured from us two build-to-suits in the south of the Netherlands, Eindhoven, for Nike. So we had all those deals done literally in a year. Committed, I don't even know the number in terms of investment. It was a huge one. Literally weeks before they were acquired. And all those people were gone. they literally were totally replaced by the next generation in GXO, which is also part of the reality that I've been in. Sometimes you have these wonderful relationships, and then company merges, or people go somewhere else. So it can stop real quick. I think that was probably a highlight, if I had to say it, because it was so much relationship driven. Similarly, a couple of years after that, we did a big deal with a company called Arrow Electronics, 1,000,000 square feet in the Netherlands, also certainly through my team. So those are good things, right? We all love the fact that we are able, through trusted relationships, to land good deals. If I look back at, of course, the 19 years I was in, for obvious reasons, the financial crisis was not a nice period to be in, for mostly reasons of having to let go of people that I personally had, hired because they had such good qualities and skills. But when, the world is on fire, and the company is on fire. By the way, Prologis and AMB were both, of course, in trouble. Bit different, not that they weren't in similar financial positions, but both were certainly suffering. So that was not wonderful. That was not a good thing to do. There was some tragedies there, personal situations that were really hard to deal with. Now, I can honestly say we did our best, of course, help these people out the best we could, but it was not a wonderful period. So 2 to 3 years of difficulty, letting people go, having a development pipeline that no one wants to lease. We had not that much bankruptcies, but you had some payment issues with customers. So it's a very different, it's all hands to the pump, mentality you have to have at that point, just to keep the business going and keep the chin up, right? Not to get into a negative mindset in an office, but keep people motivated, keep them busy. That was tough, and we learned, I think, through the various rounds of layoffs, how to even do that better. For example, I'll give you one clear one. The second round, we only call people into the room when the message was, we are letting you go. So everybody who was not let go was anxious and didn't feel well about that day. The third time, we let everybody in. Whether they kept their job or not, we let them come in. And they got what we had to say. But doesn't make the end outcome different, but maybe a better process in terms of how you deal with people that you respect around you. That's probably the upside, the good times and the bad times. The merger with Prologis, I think, was a different experience for me, because a reorganization, when you have to let people go, like I just said, in the financial crisis, you're part of it, you see it coming, it's not a big surprise, you deal with it the best way you can. Sometimes you're in a team that can influence the outcome. With a merger, you cannot. It just happens. A small group of people, for obvious reasons, has decided that that's what is going to happen. But you, as a regular person in a company, when you're not part of that very small elite group that knows what's going to happen, you don't know, and it's a big surprise. So that was sort of early 2011. That was a different experience. I'd never been in a merger. I'd done tons of reorganizations, but in different companies, but not a merger. Different dynamic.
It really strikes me as you were going through that the economy, real estate specifically, is a cycle, and there's ups and downs, and the ups are very enjoyable. You celebrate the successes, and the downs are tough and they're painful. And I think that over this last 12 years or so now, give or take, we've been mostly on an up cycle, and perhaps now we're entering into this down cycle, and a lot of newer people into the industry haven't seen a down cycle. So there's probably been a lot of reasons to celebrate over the last 10 years or so. But if we do enter into a period of recession, and we'd be speculating, so I don't even want to go down that road, but it does strike me that over your 19-year career, you've gone through that cycle of the good times of celebrating the wins when you do a 1 million square foot build a suit, but also those layoffs and having to let people go that you would have liked and you would have wanted to
Yep.
keep. It really does emphasize how it is a cycle.
It is a cycle, absolutely. And again, all of that has, parts that you can learn from, that I've learned from. We would deliberately, when we presenting ourselves to customers for big pitches, we deliberately used the word cycle tested on resumes of people that we were, presenting as the deal team or the people that were going to handle this big acquisition of this portfolio, because it makes a difference. It makes a difference whether you've been in it or not, whether you've seen, those two sides of the economy. And you recognize people in the customer world as well who have been in that, the people that have gone through those cycles on your customers. And in that relationship, you can see the difference as well. And that's not to say good or bad, but it makes it different when you've been in either one of those extremes. Because, for example, if you've just been in an upcycle, you don't know how to do, a lease regear or even a lease surrender. When the crisis hit, we could only do our best to get space leased under the terms that we felt were acceptable to the customer, but ultimately the customer decides. So there is not much that you cannot manufacture demand when demand isn't there, right? You can facilitate it, you can make it attractive, but when the market is just down and nobody moves, it's just very hard to do that. So our development portfolio relative to the Prologis, legacy Prologis development portfolio was small. Our problem was not as big as it was on the other side of the fence. But it's good to learn from it. I've learned to regear leases, how to deal with, people that say, give me a break, give me a lease, break. I don't want to leave this building. I want to stay here, but what can you do too? And we did the same thing, by the way, in Corona. In that time, of course, responsible for our biggest customers, and you'll probably notice from looking at public announcements, the clear position of Prologis was we're not going to give financial breaks or lease. We're not. Bigger customers still have to pay rent and lease space. Right? Because what we are going to do is help people who are in real trouble. So if you're well financed, the storm is hard for anybody. But if you're a big player, A credit, you're in good shape. This is a different reality for you than it is for this other company that literally can't pay tomorrow's paycheck for the employee. So we did that. That was not well received by these bigger occupiers because some were really tough and said, well, I'm this LSP, I'm in trouble. So what we then did, and I think that was the right thing to do, we decided that there was another toolbox of things we were going to provide to these bigger customers. For example, we exchanged a lot of bank guarantees, or even cash deposits for corporate guarantees, relieving cash for companies. We said to some companies, we're going to just regear your lease early. So your lease is out 2 years. We'll do it now. So we can give you free rent now. We're not going to say, don't pay us rent or we're letting you go out of this lease, but that's what we will do. Helped a tremendous amount. People were really grateful for that. We acquired some buildings from customers that wanted to dispose of assets that we were keen to buy. That again brought capital back to these companies. So we had a whole toolbox of possibilities that we were explaining to customers, and I think it was the right thing to do because maybe with one or two exceptions, all of them came out of it. I'm talking about the bigger, larger occupiers. All of them came out of Corona in decent shape. Their financials weren't bad. Certainly those in air and ocean freight were doing really well. So I think that's how you try to deal with a difficult situation. But if we had said, you're this big econ player, don't pay us rent, pay us back in 9 months, we would have put ourselves in real trouble, which also isn't the solution, right? You're there to help, but it also needs to be in balance with what you can do. And our possibilities aren't infinite as well, right? We're not a charity. We've got a business to run. So it's finding that middle ground in a respectful way. And again, some people have been yelling at me, and I expected them to yell at me. And most of them were like, yeah, not what I wanted to hear, but tell me what you can do. So that was done in this same attic office, 2022 until end of 2021. They were not great days, Chad. Yeah.
I went through them too, and I would echo those comments. It was a tough time, but
Yeah.
the having the mindset of being positive, trying to come up with solutions, trying to come up with a way to keep everybody happy. I could see that that's a mantra of Prologis, and I'm sure that's contributed just to the success that they've had. So I agree with you. I really like that term that you brought up, the cycle tested, because I'm the same. I've been doing it for 18 years now, and so I went through the Great Recession as well, and then I went through pandemic, and you learn things. It's hard. You can't necessarily get that in a textbook or just hear about it anecdotally. You actually have to go through that. So I really like that term that you brought up there, cycle tested.
And I think just in terms of, maybe just quickly, one final piece on sort of how to deal with these difficult situations. The same is true for how you deal with brokers, right? I know a lot of people on your show are in the broker business. If life is tough, if things aren't great, right, and you have to re-gear leases, or you have to make the best out of your development pipeline that you want to lease, what you should not do is say to the broker, we're not going to pay you, or we're going to cut your fee. Why? Because, well, the world's on fire. You're going to suffer from that. We never did that. I never did that. It was always a respected relationship, even in the times when I was doing leasing myself, if that deal had come through my network, I would still pay the broker. Of course, you have a relationship, a contract, a trusted relationship. You will not understand how many people there are in this business that would do something entirely different. And I think ultimately you can only do that once, because those same relationships you will need when times get better, when you want to get deals sourced, when you want to have a first and last look at something. So why would you do that? I've seen it happen around me, not in the company I was in. Fortunately, I think we were always broker friendly, but how short-sighted that is. And if the broker says, we'll chip in, we'll do something because we get it, that's different from saying, not going to pay you, or terminating your contract. For people that are the extended arm of your business, right? They're there for a reason. So just something to add to what you said.
Yeah, there really is a lot of power in having those strong relationships. So I would echo that comment. Yep. So now that you've left Prologis, what are you up to these days?
Okay, good one. I founded a little company, literally a vehicle for me to have my own business, called Summit Book. The reason I have done that is the one thing that I discovered during a broker trip. In fact, this is maybe a nice anecdote. I did a broker trip a couple of years ago with the top 10 of our largest broker clients, relationships, contacts, in Malta, and we were sailing with them on various ships. And I was on a ship for a day with a team of good friends. And of course, the skipper was there. So I got into contact with this guy. And I could see this was a man with a story. So I discovered that he was not only doing that work, he was not only skipper on a ship for 3 days in a week. For 4 days in a week, he was a dentist in Malta, in Valletta, Malta. So that opened my eyes, and I was like, oh, so you can actually do multiple things. I do one thing, right? I work with customers. I do that, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. done it for 19 years. That's what I do. But this gentleman actually does two things well, with passion and interest. So that was the trigger for me to say, I want to be able to be free to do what I want to do. Because if I'm employed by Prologis, I can't have side jobs. That's the deal. That's my contract. But I want to do different things on a Monday than I do on a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Friday. Maybe you want to take care of, an elderly parent, or I want to do something different. So Summit Book allows me to do three things. I've called it speaker, advisor, mentor. So speaker means I'm doing guest lectures in industrial real estate, supply chain management at a university in Rotterdam. I actually am a thesis supervisor and an examiner for master's students. I've done 15 this year, getting them through the whole program and getting them through the process of writing their thesis and going through defense. That's the speaker part. I do motivational speaking. I speak about presenting, right? Something I've always liked to do. So that's the speaker part. The advisor part is there are many businesses, not just in industrial real estate, but in the business to business world, who don't really understand how to connect with customers, how to be customer centric, how to have an account management program. So I advise some companies in that. That's the advisor piece. And then mentor is I have young people. I have literally between the age of 35 and 60, people who mostly I've worked with in previous jobs or companies, who are open to listen to an old dog who can reflect on life and careers and what's important, and how they move from the one job to the next, or what's just keeping them up at night. I wouldn't qualify myself as a coach, right? I haven't got proper education to do that, but I've got 32 years of international business experience to share, and that's worth something. So it's wonderful to do, and I can do that face to face. I can do it from my office, wherever in the world I am. We travel a lot. I can do that online. So that's what I do these days. So it's all about, I would say, sharing, giving back, making best use of the things I've learned, good and bad, for people who are open to it. And that's something that I do, of course, commercially. I do it for individuals privately, but I also do it for companies through corporate contracts. And it still gives me enough latitude to do something that I want to do that has nothing to do with work. Again, we travel. We've always traveled a lot throughout the world. I've got two sons, aged 22, 25, who sometimes come to me and say, "Dad, we want to buy this house. How do we do that?" I want to have time for that as well. My life has been busy. Not a surprise. I've been in airplanes, probably there have been years when I was in an airplane 2-3 times a week. And that's nice at some point, but it's pretty heavy if you do that longer than it's good for you. So it's good to find a better balance and to enjoy life a bit at 57. I'm not at pension age yet, but another 10 years to do these things under the header of Summit Book.
It seems like you're striking the right balance of combining 32 years of business experience with enjoying it as well, as opposed to working 14-hour days and never spending time with your family and not being able to help out your kids. Now you've got that balance where the latitude, as you mentioned. I think that's a great way of describing it.
Exactly. And I think, Chad, that it's not a bad thing to say that when you're very young, when I was in my earliest years of my career, I didn't have that balance. I wasn't taking good care of my health, my social life. Because when you're just working, because you're ambitious and you're good at what you do, people love what you do, there is a risk that you sort of flip too much to that end of your life and you're missing out other things. And over time, you come to that conclusion. You try to find a better balance. Now, that doesn't get easier because at that time, you've moved up in the food chain. You're more senior, so there's even more expectations towards you in terms of performance and presence and being available by phone 24 hours a day to be on full time. But yeah, at some point, you need to make that decision, and I've done that, and I don't regret it.
Where can people learn more about Summit? Or you and I are connected on LinkedIn, so I'll certainly include a link to that so people can connect with you if they want to reach out. But where can people find out more about Summit?
Yeah, I've got a website that's www.summitbook.eu, as in Europe. And that site I think is worth just checking out. It explains what I do, not just that, but especially why I do it. I've again over time been thinking a lot as to not just what people do, but what's their motivation. Why is it that Chad does what he does, or that Henk does what he does? So that's probably a deeper explanation of why I've made that choice. Yeah, people hopefully will enjoy what I do. I post sometimes on LinkedIn, so people can see that as well. Certainly when I have done certain, lectures or things that I think are interesting for people to know about, then I'll speak about it. And I'd be very interested to, again, a lot of my connections are certainly not in Europe. They're also in Asia and in the US. So I've been mentoring a person in China for a long, long time. Wonderful experience as well to have those differences between Asia and Europe. I have my first clients now in America, a gentleman in Chicago. So we'll see. And lecturing, the same thing. Look, I've done this for Rotterdam University now. But that story about, what is the importance of industrial real estate for different customer segments, for, the Air Express business or the contract logistics world or e-com last mile. That story is applicable to all jurisdictions, I would say. It's not a Europe story, it's a global one. So anybody who's interested, feel free to make that connection.
Well, I can certainly see your passion for it, and I, for one, am very grateful that we were able to connect because I just got a much better sense of the European market and your story as well. So I really do want to thank you for taking the time to jump on this call with me, and I'd encourage people to check out your website and connect with you on LinkedIn. But Henk, once again, thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks so much, Chad. It was a pleasure, and good luck with the future editions of your show.
Hi, I'm Chad Griffiths, and I'm pleased to announce that I'll be offering a membership/mentorship program in 2024. It's going to cost $250 for the entire year, and it'll grant you exclusive access to interviews with some CEOs, high-producing brokers, economists, and really anybody that will help make your journey in industrial real estate that much more productive. And it will also have access to a wide array of professionals all across the world. I'm going to put a limit on this just so that it doesn't get to a crazy amount where we can still have a tight-knit community. And for the first people that sign up, maybe the first 50 people that sign up, I'm also going to send an industrial real estate merch pack. So it'll be a really cool coin and some other stuff in there. So sign up now. First guest will be mid-January. And again, members will have exclusive access to ask questions, get to know other people in the forum, and really just try to make this value add. $250. My plan will be that you get a multiple of value back in and above that $250 cost. And again, that's for the whole year. So look forward to having you join and really growing out this community and membership in 2024. So put a link below. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me or Wyatt, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks. Look forward to a productive 2024.